Now that we've finished our basics, we're going to dive deep into the standards or the quality assurance standards. In this section, we're going to be discussing two types of standards. The CBAHI standards, which is the Saudi Arabian Central Board for Accreditation of Healthcare Institutions, and the Gahar standards, which is the same thing but in Egypt. These are the standards that we're going to be discussing for CBAHI and Gahar. We have, of course, the disinfectants, the cleanliness standard, the blood and body fluid spill management standards, the PPE, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene standards, as well as the laundry standards. Now, the first standard, of course, we're going to begin with is the hand hygiene standard. Now, the reason why we're going to be discussing all of these standards that may not seem immediately relevant to the laundry department is because all of these practices are applied to all the departments in the healthcare facility, including, of course, the laundry department. The first standard, of course, the hand hygiene standard, begins by stating that the hospital or the healthcare institution supports appropriate hand hygiene practices as well as providing sufficient hand hygiene facilities. In Gahar, this standard is an NSR standard, meaning it is a national safety requirement. This is one of the utmost and the most important standards to be implemented in the Gahar standards. Now, how do I make sure I implement these standards? First and foremost, you need a policy that is written based on international or even local-based guidelines. You need to make sure that the supplies for hand hygiene are available in sufficient quantities throughout the healthcare facility. You have to make sure that you train your healthcare personnel within the facility to perform hand hygiene as appropriate, as well as making sure you monitor for compliance. Compliance of hand hygiene is one of the most important KPIs we can be using in the infection control department. As we've discussed before, hand hygiene is one of the most easiest and most cost-efficient ways to prevent the transmission of microorganisms. Gahar goes further to talk about or specifically discuss the use of posters throughout the healthcare facility. Posters to identify hand washing and hand rubbing methods, as well as your 5 moments. After discussing this hand hygiene standard, we're going to discuss the personal protective equipment standard, which states that, of course, PPE is supervised by the infection control team and is available and used correctly when indicated. If you recall, we've just discussed, of course, the donning and the doffing sequence of PPE as per the CDC and WHO guidelines. These need to be practiced well and stated in the healthcare facility's policy of PPE. Another thing that we have to make sure that PPE are available in sufficient quantities to make sure it covers all of the staff's needs and use. Gahar goes on to talk specifically about the selection, specification, and storage of these PPEs. We have to select PPEs that have specific specifications such as NIOSH approval, FDA approval, or even local governmental approval, as well as storing them in adequate areas, including good ventilation and areas that are not humid to cause possible disruption or destruction of the PPE. After the PPEs, we're going to be talking about respiratory hygiene. Respiratory hygiene in Gahar has its own standard, which is IPC standard number 8. Respiratory hygiene is implemented as an element of standard precaution. We've discussed our standard precautions and we've stated that respiratory hygiene is amongst the standard precautions used. To make sure that we are compliant with this standard, we have to make sure that our posters are available throughout the healthcare facility indicating the proper method of cough etiquette, as well as making sure our supplies are available, which include, of course, tissues and surgical masks, and the quick identification and isolation of possible respiratory-based diseases. Moving on to the fourth standard, the cleanliness and the blood and body fluid spill management standards. In CBAHI, there's 2 different standards for this topic. The first standard states that the hospital has policies and procedures for housekeeping, and there is a system to handle blood and body fluids. Gahar states that environmental cleaning activities are aligned with current evidence-based guidelines. Amongst its substandards, it speaks specifically about blood and body fluid spill management. Now, what would we need while we're implementing these standards? First and foremost, as with everything else in infection control, you would need a policy. The policy is the handbook that guides you throughout the methods or the practices of infection control within the facility. You would need a policy specific for blood and body fluid spill management, as well as cleaning checklists for every area indicating the surfaces touched, the disinfectants used, and the methods of disinfecting. as well as schedules of cleaning that can be placed in the specific department or supplied to departmental heads to make sure that you monitor your cleaning work. Another standard we have to talk about is the disinfectants standards. The disinfectant standard, as per CBAHI, it states that disinfectants use is supervised by the Infection Prevention and Control Team, while Gahar states that soap, washing detergents, and antiseptics and disinfectants are available, selected, and used according to current clinical care standards. What these two standards discuss is basically the specifications and the selection of disinfectants, the availability of disinfectants within the healthcare facility, as well as the accessibility and the training. The accessibility, we have to make sure, of course, that the disinfectants are not placed far away from where they're needed, which means that these disinfectants are available in enough quantities to make sure that they are being used as appropriate. The training here means that we have to provide training to workers who are going to be handling these disinfectants. For instance, we cannot just simply take an entire bottle and empty it into a washing machine. You would have to eventually use dilution ratios. You would have to dilute it to make sure that you preserve your linens that are being used. We've covered the majority of the basic standards that refer to the basic practices we've discussed early on in this video. Before we begin or we dive deeply into these standards, we have to just put a few rules that we're going to be discussing throughout this section of the video. First and foremost, we have to use these two definitions while we are talking about linens. Used linens and contaminated linens. In this video, I'm going to be referring to used linens as linens that do not have any visible contamination on them. Contaminated linens are going to be linens that have been used by the patients and have evidence of contamination. There's a blood stain on it, there's a body fluid stain on it, or they have been generated from an isolation room or a negative pressure room. Another rule we have to keep in mind, of course, is the laundry staff, in addition to the majority of staff in the healthcare institution, have to have serological screening performed and appropriate vaccinations given to them. Now, what makes a compliant department? Either a laundry department or any department in the healthcare institution. First and foremost, you're implementing all of the infection control practices, specifically hand hygiene, PPE use, and precautions, as well as practices that are limited to this specific department. Now we're going to be diving deeper into the laundry-based standard in both CBAHI and Gahar. Both standards, either in CBAHI or Gahar, tells you that the laundry functions are supervised by the infection control team. There's a policy that describes from the method of collection of the linens all the way to the method of use of the linens. For instance, the policy of laundry must include, of course, who is collecting, who is transporting, who is washing, and who is storing, and how to store the linens that are being cleaned. What temperatures must the water be during the washing cycle? How long is the washing cycle? What infection control practices are used within the facility or even before the linens coming to the facility, including, of course, the collection of linens, as well as other infection control practices as we've just discussed. We have to stop here and discuss something important. How is the laundry department designed? Is it just one single department? Of course not. Standards both state that there has to be some sort of segregation between three sections: the sorting section, the washing section, and the drying and storing section. The sorting section is preferable to be separated completely from the washing section, as it is the most contaminated section of the department. This is where all of the dirty linens or the laundry come and to be sorted out to the different colors and different textiles that need to be washed as based on the fabric itself. Now, some studies have shown that this section of the laundry department should be placed under negative pressure. Another thing that should be placed in the sorting area is hand hygiene facilities. This is the area where the majority of unbagged loose linen is handled. Even if you're wearing PPEs, of course, when you take your PPEs off, you need to perform your hand hygiene. So you have to have somewhat of a sink available as well as some sort of alcohol gel dispenser. Moving on to the second section, which is the washing section, you would have your washing machines there, and if you can, possibly have your drying section adjacent to it, that would be absolutely perfect. This is where you wash, of course, all of your linens, and each washing machine should have a temperature log as well as a time for the cycle. Moving on to the last section of the laundry department, which is the drying and storing section. This section, of course, should not be humid, as you are storing all of the clean linen in this area, as well as it should be not accessible to anybody except the laundry personnel. Now, the laundry cycle, of course, includes the collection, the transport, the sorting, the washing, drying, the storage, the transportation, and then back to the use and collection again. Now, in our policy, we have to identify who is going to be collecting and the method of collection itself, making sure while the person or the personnel is collecting these linens, they are not agitating the linens unnecessarily. We're not violently shaking the bedsheet to make sure that we aerosolize the microorganisms within the air. Of course, we would have to have some sort of trolley or a laundry chute that we can place these dirty linens into to avoid the spread of contamination. The transport, depending on the facility itself, either we would have a laundry chute that would go directly to the laundry department, or it would have to be transported via using a laundry trolley that is identifiable and labeled correctly. After that, after transporting the linens either via the laundry chute or via the trolley, it would reach the laundry department and where it's sorted. Of course, while the personnel is sorting them, they have to make sure that they perform proper hand hygiene and wear their proper PPEs, as well as, again, avoid agitation of the used or contaminated bed sheets. Linens that have originated from isolation rooms, such as negative pressure rooms, are preferable to be placed in a water-soluble bag. Hence, this would prevent the healthcare worker working in the laundry department from sorting out the linens. They would just place it directly into the washing machine and the water itself will dissolve the bag itself. After that, of course, the washing, we have two different types of requirements for the washing machine. We have the high temperature washing and we have the low temperature washing or the low temperature cycle. The high temperature cycle, as per the CDC, they recommend the use of at least 71 degrees Celsius or 160 degrees Fahrenheit for a minimum of 25 minutes to prevent or to destroy any sort of microorganisms that can be present on the used linens or contaminated linens. High temperatures are usually used for severely contaminated linens as well as linens that are generated from the isolation room. The low temperature washing cycle, the temperature should range from 71 degrees Fahrenheit to 77 degrees Fahrenheit while pairing the washing cycle with some sort of detergent such as chlorine-based detergent, a sodium hydrochloride detergent, so as long as, of course, you follow up with dilution ratios of the detergent itself. Finally, of course, we go into the drying and the storing. We basically take our washed linens out of the washing machine and place them into the dryer. The dryer itself would dry under high temperatures, thus providing an extra layer of decontamination. And of course, the storing is preferable to store the washed linens in individually wrapped packages so as to contain or as to preserve the cleanliness of the item in itself. Finally, of course, these clean linens have to be transported to the department that is going to be used in, and it's preferable, of course, to transport them in a closed container as to not further risk the contamination of the items in the trolley itself. After all of this, the linen is used and we return back to the beginning of the cycle. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this course as well as benefited from it. Please feel free to share to make sure to spread the knowledge and spread the love. And also follow us on our social media platforms, which include Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and enable the notification bell to receive notifications on our newest videos. Thank you for joining us here at ZACCO.